Imperial yeast is at it again with their Imperialis project, creating yet another unique proprietary strain through the hybridization of 2 other yeasts. In addition to its excellent attenuation and rapid reduction of diacetyl, I-10 Mangostini contributes robust, ripe tropical fruit, strawberry, and lychee notes to beer that complement modern hops. And as a Kveik hybrid, it can be fermented anywhere from 78 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 26 to 32 degrees Celsius without issue. Head over to imperialyeast.com to learn more about I-10 Mangostini and be sure to pick some up for your next batch of fruity IPA. It doesn't matter how many times I explain what my original intention in starting the exBEERiment series was, people often presume that I, for whatever reason, purposefully aimed to disprove certain things that we'd been taught were essential. That's not true at all, actually. I was interested in tasting for myself the negative impact of going against the rules. Suffice to say, things went a bit different of a direction, and one of the things we're asked about all the time is how the results of our experiments have influenced our own brewing. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and I am joined by contributor Cade Jobe on this episode to finally lay out our unabashed views on certain exBEERiment results and how we've been influenced by them.
No, Marshall. You intended the exBEERiment series to destroy homebrewing, right?
That's right, yeah.
That's what it was. It wasn't to test variables. It was to destroy people's fun.
Yeah. Actually, you know what's funny in you saying that, Cade, is that I got an email. I think I mentioned this recently, actually. I got an email from somebody who called themselves Bob. I'm certain that's not their real name. Who just one line was like, why are you destroying homebrewing? It was like 4 or 5 years ago. Like, oh man, thanks for the, that's a big task there.
I know, it comes up every now and then. There's a comment that always pops up like Brewlosophy is destroying homebrewing, but no, I mean the exBEERiment series is fantastic. It's like why I got it. It's why I dove into the science of brewing, because it's really cool, right? I mean, we do these experiments and we can change variables, and for homebrewers, this information wasn't available anywhere. I mean, nobody was doing these experiments, and we've been doing it now for almost 10 years, right? 8 years at this point. You've been doing it, and it's super impactful. It's impactful not just for homebrewers, but also for commercial brewers, and like we're talking about in this episode, in our own brewing practices. I mean, some experience have mattered to me, others not so much, and I can't wait to talk about that today.
Yeah. And we are actually coming up on our 10th year, which blows my mind. We're in our 9th year now, and yeah, we've been doing this for a long time. We're over 500 exBEERiments, so obviously, some of what we have done has had an impact on the way we think. It's really funny to me. When you first proposed this idea, Cade, I sort of rebuffed it, as you recall, because I felt like it was something that I've just addressed so many times over the last decade or so. It then occurred to me that we've actually never talked about it in detail on this podcast, but rather it's a topic that has come up in other interviews that I've done for other, outfits, or when I'm giving talks at events and stuff like that. So considering, how often we're still asked about the influence that our exBEERiments have had on our approach to brewing and the things that we do, I agree with you that this topic is definitely deserving of some attention, and I too look forward to getting into it with you. Now, real quick, I just want to remind our listeners, as I do every Brews Views, that this is a Brews Views episode where we allow ourselves to kind of let loose a little bit, share our personal opinions. We're a little bit less, I'm not going to say unhinged, but we are less organized in this one. So we're not going to be too flagrant or anything, but we don't censor ourselves as much in this series. Please, if you're bothered by certain language, feel free to just skip this episode altogether. All right, if you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support, please consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. By making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with someone in the brewing world. Just last month, we had John Palmer on, and that guest for this month, October of 2023, is, well, yours truly. That's right. There have been quite a few requests lately from patrons to have me come back on this Q&A session and kick it with and answer some questions for patrons. And since it's been a couple of years since the last time I did it, I thought it might be kind of fun as well. So I'm pretty open book, whether it's about brewing stuff or not. So if there's something you've been dying to know about me, here's your opportunity. This session is going to be held on Saturday, October 28th, 2023. So to be a part of it, you have to make your pledge of just $3 or more at patreon.com/Brewlosophy no later than Friday the 27th. All past sessions are available on our private Patreon and Facebook pages, so you can go back and watch them whenever you like. You can learn more about becoming a patron and all of the rewards that we we offer for your support over at patreon.com/brewlosophy. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at brewlosophy.com/support when shopping online. Your shopping experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little kickback for the referral. With the holiday season upon us here, which I cannot believe we're already able to say that, we would really appreciate you taking the time to use those links as they help us to cover the cost of producing all of this stuff. Finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a rating and a review of this show in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, that would be awesome as well. Thanks to everybody who has already taken the time to do this already. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who are known for their incredible all-in-one electric brewing systems. I've brewed on both their 120 and 240 volt systems, and I'm telling you, these things are legit, man. Efficient, easy to use, with a relatively small footprint. You're not going to be disappointed with one of these units. Plus, the guys behind the company run an amazing YouTube channel that you can find by searching YouTube for Clawhammer Supply. If you're in the market for electric brewing gear or even just reasonably priced kettles and such, make sure to check out what Clawhammer Supply has to offer at clawhammersupply.com, and don't forget to let them know Brewlosophy sent you when you're checking out. That's clawhammersupply.com. Listener Dave from the Franconia region of Germany, which is rad, wrote in with a comment on someone else's feedback from a previous episode about post-boil pH adjustments when fermenting with Kveik. Dave said, of my over 100 batches, I've fermented 37 of those with 12 different Kveik strains, some commercial lab cultures and some farmhouse versions. I can definitely agree that pretty much all strains do seem to lower the pH of the final beer much more than regular ale or lager yeast do. As far as I can tell, if the pH is getting really low, you can taste a tartness, but not actual sourness in your beer. It's definitely a different sensation than lactic or acetic acid gives you. I had this happen to my very first batch as well as an imperial stout, the latter because the huge amount of roasted grain for it pulled the pH down in addition to the Kveik yeast. As you guys already mentioned, you could add pickling lime, but in Germany, it's more common to add baking soda. The great thing about that is you can add it at different points in the brewing process, although it's a lot easier to dial it in after the boil. I've made a lot of beers with Kveik where people definitely couldn't tell they were fermented with this kind of yeast. It's just important to dial these things in.
Yeah, I love this, looking at, the pH after the boil, because I think it's just something that a lot of homebrewers especially hadn't been, really interested in until, I don't know, recently. I mean, it's not like people were ignoring their pH, but that certainly plays a role. And like you said, if the pH is a little bit low, even if it's at like 3.9 or 4, the beer could taste a little bit tart. So yeah, raising that pH can also be something that you do at the end of boil, and that's great. Yeah, using baking soda, pickling lime, all that stuff. But really, that's the key, right? Kveik yeast apparently has this. I mean, that's the first I've heard of Kveik yeast having that. Other than the original feedback, but those are the first times that I had heard of Kveik yeast having this issue where the pH drops too low. But I think it kind of speaks to the bigger thing of looking at your pH after the boil and making some adjustments from there, especially if you're perceiving some flavor differences in your beer when using Kveik yeast or other yeasts that might lower the pH, or like he said, roasted grains or something like that.
Yeah.
That knocks the pH out of whack a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sure I mentioned it in that episode, but I've never personally fermented with Kveik, and of the many Kveik fermented beers I've sampled, I've never picked up a noticeable acidity of any sort, whether it's, lactic-like or acetic-like or just some form of, acidity. I've never noticed that. I do know that fermentation naturally does pull the pH down, but what it sounds like Dave is saying is that that when you're fermenting with Kveik, yeah, it pulls it down a little bit more. I'd like to see a comparison of that because that I don't know why that would happen. I'm also not a microbiologist, so that might explain my idiocy on this, but I have to imagine it's not really a huge issue for most people, and that those post-boil adjustments, I mean, I don't know what you'd be doing that for, unless you are unhappy with the outcome of the beer. I get that, but if you're not perceiving it, then why, no need to fix something that's not really broken is the way that I look at it. But I do think it's interesting, no less, and I appreciate you for reaching out, man. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. When we return from this break, our views on some of the more influential experiment results. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of work, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the exGEERator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clearer wort in the fermenter. Brewlosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the exGEERator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every exGEERator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to exGEERator.com today. It took some time for me to fully accept that the results of our experiments have actually motivated some brewers to make changes in their process. That certainly was not the goal when I started out, and even now, nearly 10 years later, that's not really what we're after. As much as I enjoy hearing from folks who made changes that have led to a more enjoyable brewing experience, it is kind of aggravating when people make erroneous claims of certainty about our findings, and even more so when we get shit for encouraging it, because we don't encourage that. Anyway, one thing I hope does not happen as a result of this episode is people interpreting our opinions, which is all they are, that's what the Brews View series is all about, as fact. We've said it a million times, and I'll say it again. Each experiment finding represents a single data point, and as interesting and potentially meaningful as that might be, it does not a principle make. Incredible world-class beer can obviously be produced using traditional methods, and while we might believe different approaches lead to a similar outcome, we are in no way saying that those methods are meaningless or that those who employ them are doing anything wrong. All right, with that out of the way, I thought it might be fun to go in sort of a timeline of the brewing process, Cade, starting with ingredient variables, as recipe is, generally considered prior to brewing.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great place to start, right? Because the ingredients, you're putting those together before you're doing anything else. But I do want to echo exactly what you just said. We can't say it enough, right? Even anything that we share on this show, these are our opinions, and we're not trying to influence your opinions, okay? You get to have your opinions, and we get to have our opinions. It's the awesome part about living in free countries. So I'm not trying to change the way that you brew. All I'm doing is sharing my opinions on the way that I look at these things based on the experiments. So yeah, that out of the way. Ingredients. Yeah. So, I guess we should start with malt then, right? That's kind of the first one that we deal with whenever we're creating a beer. And so for me, one of the biggest things that the experiments has done to me in terms of malt is I'm much less concerned about switching between base malts, right? Like pills versus pale malt. That one's been a big change in my brewing practices. I've talked a whole bunch of times about that Kolsch recipe because it's easy to talk about on a podcast. It's 95% pills or pale malt and 5% red wheat, right? That's the malt bill for my Kolsch. It's super easy. And again, pills malt or pale malt. And because I've brewed Kolsches with both of them and I couldn't taste a difference, or at least they both tasted the same with me. And it turns out there's a lot of experiments where people couldn't taste the difference between pale and pills malts, brewed in a whole bunch of different styles. So that one has been one of those things that's really influenced my practices, at least. But that interchange between base malts. And I think there's other experiments like, secondary or not secondary, special malts, that might have different influences. We've tested like caramel malts and different, ratios of the different caramel malt colors. And I think those have returned significant. But that base malt, switching back and forth between base malts, especially for homebrewing, I'm really not too concerned about switching between the two.
Yep, I'm right there with you. In fact, I started doing this thing where I would get pale malt just to have it around, because I do feel like in certain applications there are I have to preface this with, on my system in certain applications, I might prefer pale malt over pills malt, not for flavor impact or anything like that, but purely because when I use Pils malt, it's like hotter. I get more conversion for some reason. I don't know why. It's a consistent thing in my brewery. I've talked to other people who that doesn't happen to, though locally it does seem to be a thing here. And that's whether I'm using Mecca grade malt, Weyermann malts, RAR malts, whatever it is, I seem to get a little bit better conversion. So I actually switched over to using Pilsner malt for almost, all of my regular American style beers. So whether I'm making an IPA or a Pilsner, that's kind of what I'm going with. So that one certainly made me kind of rethink my adherence to using specific base malts for, depending on the style. I'm not sure it's nearly as important, or I should say this, for me, it's not nearly as important as I once thought it was. But the other one, and I think more influential for me was and this is based on not only, I think, 2 experiments, but also a short and shoddy, I think, is one of the original short and shoddy ones. Old malt. There's this idea out there that you've got to go get your malt from the homebrew shop, not mill it until right before you're going to mash in so that you don't get stale malt flavors. I mean, I bought that hook, line, and sinker. I have brewed beers with malts that were, I think it was 5 years old, and it had been milled 5 years prior. Now, we did see that it had a fairly low conversion. My brew house efficiency and mash efficiency was a bit lower than I normally get. So maybe there's something there. Could also be that I didn't mill it. It was milled at the homebrew shop. But the beer came out tasting pretty great. It did not taste stale. And I do not like stale flavors. That's something I'm pretty sensitive to. So I think more than anything, when it comes to grain, when it comes to malt, I'm not nearly as concerned about its age, as long as it's been stored well. And by that, I just mean there's no bugs in it, there's no dead mice in it, and it's not wet. Then I'm pretty cool using it. It's not going to bother me if I pick up a sack, for 25% off or something at the store, and it's a year and a half old. So.
Yeah, I'm totally there with you. I actually had this one down a little bit further, but maybe I should have brought it up the top. Storage. I mean, it's not just malt, even for me. But I'm totally fine using malt that's been stored even like in my garage for as long as it's in a dry, dark area, and like you said, no mice, no bugs, no mold, no wet. I'm totally fine doing it. I'll use it if it's 2 or 3 years old. I don't think I've noticed any changes. And I would say the same thing for hops in my freezer. And I've stopped throwing out hops that are a year or 2 old. I mean, like as long as they're in the freezer and they're not, they're just hanging out in there and they're reasonably well sealed. Vacuum seal them if you want to. But I'll use old hops too. So that's like an ingredient one, right? That the experiments have influenced for me, using old malt and hops. Now, I won't use old liquid yeast.
It won't work for you if you do, right?
That won't work. Dry yeast, totally fine. Stick that in the freezer and it's totally fine too. But liquid yeast, no way. That one's the only one that I won't use if it's old.
I won't use it if it's too old. But if it's like 8, especially Imperial, for some reason, it's like whatever mojo they're putting in those pouches, it does seem to extend the shelf life a bit. But if it's over a year, I might try to propagate it and then give it a whiff. I mean, that's easy enough. And if it smells good, I'm down to use it. And I've propagated, I've increased that viability enough. Hops, though, another one for the hops. The experiment that we did that really changed my perspective of hops. I don't know if it changed it. This is one that actually did kind of confirm my beliefs. So, when I started getting into the whole bulk thing 10 or so years ago, it's so easy, when you're at YakimaValleyHops.com to just be like, okay, let's get like 6-7 pounds. Oh my gosh, Amarillo's on sale, Simcoe's on sale. Let's load all this up, get my freezer loaded. Well, I did that. Well, I think it was like 7 or 8 years ago, I get an email from some guy and he's like, hey man, I've got this old Simcoe in my fridge. It looks okay, but there's a hole in the vacuum pack, and it's like, I think it was like 8 or 9 years old at the time, something like that. But he's like, I'll send it to you if you want to do an experiment comparing it to fresh Simcoe. Well, at the time we'd already done a comparison, I believe with Willamette, and maybe even another one, and it was just purely on the age of the hops. Both had been stored really well, right? Well, this guy sends them to me. So they've been warm, during the shipping process. There's certainly no seal in the bag. So I thought, well, we've already done, the hop age thing when both are stored well. Let me throw this on my workbench for a week. And so now it's going to be, exposed to some amount of oxygen or air or whatever it is. So, and warm and kept warm. So now we've got the age thing, but then we've got this, this other factor, this other variable of some form of exposure to oxygen. Those beers could not have been more different. I believe all but one person were able to distinguish those beers in that experiment. And I'm telling you, my my perception of that old, oxidized hop Simcoe beer was that it was so bitter, and it's difficult for me to really explain the way what I've been told is called beta acid bitterness is. It's sharp. It coats your entire mouth, and you can't get it out for a while. It's not your typical beer, alpha acid clean bitterness. It was like this sticky, almost painful level of bitterness. And it did not taste good. I don't know why people say cheesy. It didn't taste like cheese to me. It was just gross. It had like this, the Simcoe character was very, very muted. Any fruitiness, any of the delightful stuff that you expect was gone. It was just this bitter, icky thing. And from that point forward, I definitely understand the need to, keep these stored at least in a freezer and cold and out of touch of oxygen. Well, I went up to Hop Harvest after that, and I was telling some hop growers up there and hop experts about that experiment. They were saying, actually, yeah, it's not even really just the oxygen piece. You don't have to vacuum seal hops. That's a nice step. But what I was told was if you keep them out of the light and in the freezer, they will last for years. Hops will last for years and not degrade. They're like, yeah, we see in these brewing calculators how, there's these, how long have you had it? And it reduces the alpha acid and the bitterness potential and all of that. And they're like, we don't quite understand that. As long as they're stored cold and out of the light, you should be good to go. And so that's a huge influence that I've had. So now I haven't used my vacuum sealer in probably 5 years because I just keep them in the Mylar bag because it keeps the light off of them when I pull them out to weigh them out. So.
Yeah, I've actually never owned a vacuum sealer, so I've never vacuum sealed my hops. I do the same thing. I just kind of squeeze out as much of the air as I can. I mean, and I'm not even trying to get all the air out. I'm just trying to squeeze it out as I zip it closed in those Yakima Valley hop pouches that they come in, right?
Yeah.
And I just stick it back in the freezer and then go along. But yeah, it's really interesting, that storage piece. I'll do a quick nerdy aside, like 10 seconds. I promise it won't be long. But that HSI, so a hop bitterness, right? How long a hop stores. HSI just measures the degradation of alpha acids, and so what we see is that beta acid, that degradation product, or at least the degradation products of alpha and beta acids increases by a lot, but they're still bitter, right? For a long time, people were like, oh, the alpha acids went down, toss the hops. No, they're still bitter. They're just to provide a different bitterness, and they can even be 60% as bitter as alpha acids. So they're still there. And just because the alpha acids are gone or degrading, you're still going to get bitterness from those hops. So that's a great use of old ingredients, is as bittering hops, assuming you don't have pounds of bittering hops sitting around, because I do that same thing with Magnum, where I buy a pound of Magnum and then I don't use it for a year and a half, because I'm just using so little of it. But yeah, totally. But that's really interesting to hear that bitterness. So hopefully that was just a quick nerdy aside. But that's hops and malt. What about yeast? Which one of the yeast experiments has been most interesting to you?
Well, I want to save some of the yeast talk for later when we get into the process piece, because obviously when we talk about yeast, we're talking about fermentation. But as it relates to just yeast, there are certain strains that I think are just far more similar, kind of like you were talking about with the malt. If you're going to use 3470, for example, Saflager 3470. It's a great strain. Some people claim to get a lemon thing out of it. I've never gotten that, but you can ferment, with US-05 cold. People are going to think that I'm being blasphemous here. If you take everything else exactly the same in the recipe, for a Pilsner or something, and you use Safel, yeah, it's probably going to taste different. I think we've proven that in an experiment, but it's close enough that not everybody's going to be able to pick it apart. And I'm okay with that. I still prefer lager yeast. I do think that, I perceive a difference there and all of that, but it is neat to know that we can, if you don't have the ability to ferment cool, or if that's what you believe you have to do with lager yeasts, more to come on that note there.
Yeah,
but that you can get away with using a Kolsch yeast or, something like that. And you're going to make a nice, clean, crisp, crushable lager-like beer. And I think that's pretty cool. The only other thing with yeast is just, we did an experiment a while ago with imperial yeast. Casey actually came to my house and brewed with me, where I left a packet of A09 Pub, that's their Fuller strain, out for a couple of days while the other one stayed cool. And both beers, I actually think it did come back significant, but it wasn't like it didn't ruin the beer. The beers tasted fine. So all of this fear about like, I can't have the yeast shipped because the one day it spends at 80 degrees is going to, no, it won't. It'll be fine. Just treat it well once you get it and you should be good to go.
Yeah, it's interesting because like while at the same time, right, like while you can change maybe like different lager yeast around or maybe like different ale yeast, a couple of them around, some ale yeast and some lager yeast are like wildly different, right? I mean, like we looked at what was it, Que Bueno, I think, versus like what was the lager, Cable Car or which one was it? No, it wasn't Cable Car. Global. There we go.
Global,
I was trying to figure that out. Yeah, Global versus Que Bueno. Those yeasts are totally different, even at the same temperature, right? When we did yeast comparisons on those. So there's some yeast that you can do, but this was kind of one of my takeaways when we've done these yeast comparisons is that I pay way more attention to yeast now than I did when starting, because like Chico and Juice are going to have wildly different flavor profiles.
Oh yeah.
Right. If and so it's kind of cool to see like, hey, yeast plays a very, very big role. And I would actually probably go so far as to say there's no ingredient, water, malt, hops, and yeast. There's no ingredient that has a greater impact on beer flavor and aroma than yeast. And I think that's been sort of confirmed for me. And also look at Jordan's recent study on hop water. Right? That one that was like yeast impact on hop water. That was
weird.
Crazy. They were like totally different. They were totally different. That was like so weird. So I don't know. Yeast, like I said, it's cool that you can interchange some yeast. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. But also, you can radically change a profile of a beer just by changing the yeast.
Oh, dude. I think, on that note, I think a lot of early experimentation that homebrewers do is split batches and just fermenting with different yeast. Not only do you get, 2 different beers to have on tap, and all you did was change, the yeast, but you get to kind of taste side by side what those differences are and experience for yourself. I think it's a great way to learn about different yeast. That said, I take a little bit different of a perspective when it comes to the ingredients that have the greatest impact or whatever. To me, it is just the gestalt. I mean, you can take certain ingredients. People often say it about our experiments in general, that when you compile, when you parse out just one tiny little variable, which is what we are known for, when you do that, maybe it doesn't have an impact. But then as you start to add more and more variables and you do a whole thing, I think about the Lodo guys, you do that whole thing and they claim only by doing all of that do you really notice, the impact that doing it has. I don't disagree with that. I haven't experienced it in certain, areas for myself, but when it comes to ingredients, that's kind of my belief. Yeast, yeah, it can have a huge impact, but if you're making a hazy IPA, you can get away. I've had a hazy IPA made with Chico. It was hazy, it was hoppy, it was juicy. It had all of those things because everything else was done like a hazy IPA is supposed to be done. So that's again, that's kind of what I've gleaned from these experiments and stuff in terms of ingredients. Real quick, let's just touch on it because I'm assuming there are going to be some people out there who want to hear us talk about gear variables, which we don't do very often. The only one that I feel that we've done that has had some meaningful impact that really made me kind of scratch my head was the fermenter comparisons, namely the stainless versus plastic fermenters or glass versus plastic fermenters. And by plastic, I'm referring to HDPE buckets as well as PET carboys. There seems to be something. I mean, we've pretty consistently shown that there seems to be something about those different materials or the way those fermenters are shaped or whatever that produces a noticeable, effect on the beer. It makes them perceivably different, which I think is crazy. It didn't really... I didn't not like either of the beers when I was the one doing those experiments, the fermenter comparisons. I liked them both. They were both great. But it did make me wonder, like, what could possibly be going on on here. I don't think the plastic is leaching any, flavor compounds into the beer, but it was really interesting. And I mean, if for what it's worth, I now just use stainless. So
yeah, I mean, I've got to think there's some like oxygen transfer going through somewhere, right? Maybe not necessarily through like the PET or, through the bucket itself, but maybe through like the lid or the closure or something is just not, all the way closed. I don't know. There's got to be something, but yeah, that one totally. And then also the headspace, right? We did those headspace experiments, which were really significant. So if you're brewing, if you're putting 3 gallons of beer in a 5 or 6 gallon carboy, that's going to taste different than putting 5 gallons in that carboy. And I thought that was really interesting too, because it's kind of like size matters on the fermenter as well. You can't just ferment like a gallon or 2 of beer in a 6 gallon carboy and expect it to taste the same.
Well, okay. So here's the thing though, is I've done that and I've been very pleased with the outcome. Would it have been different had I filled the carboy? I mean, based on some of our experiment findings, probably, or maybe. I mean, but again, I just feel like just because it's different doesn't necessarily mean one is better than the other. You're not, at least in my world, I don't have to choose one that I like more. I always say that, if forced to choose, I would pick this one, but maybe that's just today. Maybe tomorrow I ought to pick the other one. And so, there's so much that you can get away with in brewing that does again. Every brewery, you could give Firestone Walker the recipe for Pliny the Elder, and it's probably going to taste different than when Vinny makes it, at Russian River. That's just the way brewing is. It doesn't mean that one is necessarily worse or better than the other. You might have a preference, but again, your preference is not objective. It does not mean that it has to be my preference. So I just, again, I like to, if I'm going to beat anything into our listeners' heads, that's what I want it to be, is that this is a very, loosey-goosey type of thing that we're doing here. So what about water chemistry, Cade? I know that nowadays a lot of us take it far more seriously than just, if your water tastes good, you can brew with it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was back whenever Brewlosophy was young. We did so many of those water chemistry experiments, right? And they all kept coming back significant, like, sulfate to chloride ratios, that were producing significant results. The amount of minerals that you add, straight RO versus adjusted RO. They were like, I mean, every time we did a water experiment, it was like boom, 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 coming back as significant. So water chemistry, I think that's been a big change for me, right? Especially whenever I first started brewing. I mean, Charlie Papazian was the one said, if the water smells good, you can brew with it. And I think that's true. You can make good beer, but to make great beer or really good beer, I think you do have to pay attention to your water chemistry. And I'm still totally in that camp of water adjustments will change the flavor of your beer. So, if you're not liking what you're brewing with, changing water is a big deal. Changing your water chemistry is a big deal.
So I think that point's key. Again, I'm gonna kind of, it's gonna sound like I'm contradicting you, but I don't mean to, Cade. You can make award-winning, world-class beer without mucking with your water. You might get lucky, okay? The way I view making water chemistry adjustments, or really, I'm gonna focus more on mineral adjustments, sulfate, chloride. You're looking at your salt levels, your sodium, all of that stuff, magnesium, all of that. The way I view it is that is the easiest lever to twist in order to change the profile of your beer. Now, it may be that you're brewing IPA that you feel is falling flat and you're going, man, I can't get it. And you add some gypsum to it, some calcium sulfate, and there you go. Boom. It's poppy, it's hoppy, it's good again, right? That is what I view it as. Now, if you like that kind of muddled, weird gray flavor, as I refer to it, then go for it. Then don't make your water chemistry, because some people do. That's called hazy IPA in my opinion. If that's what you want, then go for it. But again, if there are 2 variables that we've done that really shook me, and water chemistry is one of them. We're going to get to the other one in the next segment. But this one, the reason we did so many water chemistry experiments was because I was adamant that what Papazian and even Palmer, our friend John Palmer was kind of saying, hey, if your water's good, don't worry about it. That's the last thing you need to, and that's the guy who wrote the water book, right? So it's like I was like, well, it doesn't really matter. People are like, no, you got to try experiments doing that. And I'm like, I can't wait to prove this one wrong. And lo and behold, I am a water chemistry nut. Now, where I don't focus anymore based on experiments and my own experience is on mash pH. I don't think it really matters that much at all. I think on the the big scale, on the commercial scale, if you're trying to eke out some more efficiency, it can help you there. But we've done high mash pH versus your ideal kind of 5.2 pH. We've done super low mash pH. Yeah, the boil looks different. The wort reacts differently at different points, but the beers taste exactly the same in the end. Malt is such a strong buffer. I mean, it's going to fix a lot and draw a lot of that pH into where it needs to be anyways. That's my experience. I know people, good friends of mine, who read those experiments, who think, yeah, I see what you did. It makes sense, but I'm still going to adjust my mash pH because that's just the way you got to do it. Go do. That's fine with me. I couldn't care less about mash pH these days. I'm lucky enough to have decent water, so maybe that's a part of it. But yeah, whether I'm making, another thing like capping the mash, and I'm in reference to the mash pH thing, adding your roasted grains at the end of the mash so as not to pull your pH down too low. Don't care. I'm throwing them all in together. I prefer the flavor and the color that I get from doing a full mash with all of my roasted grains. It's never created a bad flavor, in my brewery. So, in water chemistry, very, very important, but primarily for the mineral aspect of it. Couldn't care less about the mash pH.
Yeah, I am one of your friends that adjusts his mash pH, so that still does that. I think Jordan's in that camp, and a couple of the contributors doing it too.
I think most of my friends are, Cade. I think I'm the only one who gave it up. Yeah,
I do think pH is having a little bit of a renaissance, though. Like especially in like post boil adjustments or finished beer adjustments, I think it's having a little bit of a renaissance. But I totally agree with you. Like maybe not as important as we thought in mashing. It's certainly at a homebrew level, right?
Yeah,
when we're not
exactly.
really worried about consistency or making and hitting the exact same target 5 times in the same week, right?
Right.
They may not make as big of a deal, but that was a mash variable that was important to me. And then the other ones, oh my gosh, there's been so many mash variables that have changed my life. But one of the biggest ones, and I beat my head against the wall on this one, mash length, right? And because most of the beers that I brew, I haven't brewed a whole lot this year, but the most beers that I brew are experiment beers. And that means I'm using a 60-minute mash and I'm beating myself my head against the wall because I'm like, I want to do a 30-minute mash or less. I don't need to do 60 minutes. I understand we do it because that's what everybody does. That's kind of standard protocol. It's protocol. It keeps things consistent across all the brewers. A whole bunch of reasons why we do it for experiments. But man, I would love to do a 30-minute mash. Because I just don't think there's a huge significant reason to continue doing 60-minute mashes, at least in terms of the final beer itself.
Yeah, when I first started the experiment series, it was just me doing these experiments. I was brewing every weekend, publishing every other week in the beginning. And when I got to the mash length one, it was a first off, I wanted to do this one purely to prove to myself again, what happens if you don't mash for 60 minutes, 60 seconds, that'd be fun. But the thing is, I'm a philosopher at heart. It's where the name Brewlosophy came from. I was thinking about things like, what is time anyways? I mean, time is such an ambiguous, really ultimately meaningless thing that we've organized and that we've applied to certain things as needing to happen for a certain duration. 60 minutes, which happens to be exactly 1 hour as we call it, us humans refer to it as. Like, come on, there's no way that there's something magical that happens between 59 minutes and 60 minutes, I remember thinking that, but still I was married to this idea that it has to go for 60, and if not, the beers are going to taste different. And I remember taking those beers off the tap. I believe that was one that I served to people at HomebrewCon when it was still called the National Homebrewers Conference, and it was a bunch of well-known folks who did it and couldn't pick it apart. It's just interesting to me. So that one, was a big influence for developing the Short and Shoddy series. That was one where I was like, okay, if I can get away with doing 30 minutes, and the only potential impact is that I might get a point or two less conversion, that's not a big deal to me. That was a big influence for, like I said, the Short and Shoddy series. But really, the mash variable that I think, opened my eyes the most is mash temperature. When we started doing these comparisons of a low mash temp, so like you're looking at 148 Fahrenheit versus 162, 164 Fahrenheit, I don't know about you, Cade, but I was entirely convinced. We had objective data showing that one beer, they both started at the same OG, but the one that was mashed warm, as expected, finished, 8 to 10 points higher than the other one. And I'm like, yes, we're finally going to get that significant result we've been looking for. And lo and behold, it didn't come back significant. I was fully expecting that high mash temp beer to be sweet, as people talk about, oh, it's too sweet, you should have mashed lower. It was not sweet. And what we've since learned, and I've found actual, real science papers showing that the long chain dextrins that are created, or not fermented, I should say, when you mash warm, are not perceptibly sweet necessarily. They're just not fermented. And so that it stays in there and you get lower ABV while maintaining pretty much the same flavor profile. I mean, we've done this multiple times now. People cannot tell apart low mash temp and high mash temp beers. It's fascinating.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, the other piece of that science puzzle is like the range, right? People are always like, oh, you have to mash between, 146 and 154 Fahrenheit. Yeah. That's the key range. Well, yeah, that's the ideal range. But again, science tells us that enzymes are still active outside of those temperatures, right? I probably over like 75 or getting up to like 77 or maybe even 80 Celsius. Sorry, I don't remember what those are in Fahrenheit. Maybe like 175, 180. I've switched my brewing temperatures to Celsius, so that's been a change recently. But in any event, when you get over those like high, maybe like let's say 175, 180 in Fahrenheit and like 75 to 80 Celsius, then you are going to start denaturing the enzymes. But even down at like 140 Fahrenheit or like low 60s or even like 55 Celsius, 135 Fahrenheit, you're still going to get enzyme activity.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah.
So you're still going to make beer. Yeah. They might tweak on the edges, right? Like one of them might be slightly more fermentable than the other one. Lower mash temperatures is better for beta amylase. So that'll increase the fermentability, higher alcohol, all that stuff. But like you said, I mean, there's still going to be residual dextrins in the beer. So this is another one of those that like combining the mash temperature and the length, right? Mashing for 30 minutes and just like kind of hitting somewhere in that range of 148 versus 155. That's totally taken a lot of the pressure off of mashing for me. Yeah. And certainly as a home brewer, I care much less about, I started my mash at 154, and because I wasn't recirculating or I just had it in my mash cooler, it dropped down to like 144 over the hour, and oh my God, the beer's ruined. No way. I'm not worried about that at all.
I used to be though, Cade, man. Do you remember when you first started brewing all grain and you're like, oh my God, it's 153.5 and it should be 154. Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly.
Now it's like, hey, if over an hour I lose 4 degrees, I'm winning. Cool. Who cares?
Yeah, it's like great. Exactly.
The only other mash variable I think we should hit on before we move on is the mash method or the approach to mashing. When I moved into all grain, I went batch sparge. That was the popular thing. I followed that trend. It worked great. People were starting to talk about using these big fabric bags for brewing a bag. I remember thinking those are hop socks. They're just made bigger, Yeah. And there was all the shit talked about. Oh no, you're going to get bad, astringency from squeezing the bag and yada yada. No, you don't. You do absolutely do not. The beers might look a little bit different. Obviously different methods are going to, you're going to have to do different things and it might yield a somewhat different outcome, but you're making great beer. I've won awards with brewing a bag. I've won awards with modified fly sparging. I've won awards with batch sparge. Anything that you choose, if it keeps you brewing, then just do it. And if you enjoy it, I personally, the age that I am and how long I've been brewing, I just prefer brewing a bag because it's simpler. I don't have to have as much gear. I can save room for my kids in the garage, So that's my take on that. Do you have any comments on the actual mash method?
Yeah. Mash method, and then there is one more mash variable that we got to talk about. But method. So mash method for me, this is the you do you thing. Exactly. All of those fly sparge, batch sparge, BIAB. You do you. And I loved these experiments personally because it gave me confidence in my equipment.
Yeah.
Whatever I'm doing, fly sparging, brewing a bag, whatever equipment that I have on hand that I can do, I can make the best beer possible. Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
No. Well, you know what I think would be hilarious? We talked about this years ago. Is if we did like, all right, have a whole bunch of people, whoever's willing to do it, take a personality test. This is my wheelhouse here. And then like at the end, you ask them what mash method they use. Cause I have a feeling that the more neurotic brewers are like fly sparge adherents, they're the hardcore, gotta do it like a professional brewery. But then the more loosey goosey, like, type B type of folks are probably more into the batch sparge or even more so into the, all in one full volume brewing a bag type stuff. But what's the final mash variable that you want to talk about? Because I'm curious.
The Great Trube experiment,
Oh.
right? We gotta talk about racking clear wort to the fermenter. I guess we haven't talked about boiling or anything yet, but that's kind of a mash, like boiling experiment. But it's like racking clear wort, right? Even out of like the Vorloff stage, racking clear wort from the mash into the kettle, or from the kettle into the fermentation, right? Like clear wort, I'm so much less concerned about having like perfectly clear wort at any stage in the process until the end. By the end, I want clear beer, but I don't care about clear wort.
Yeah, well, I do have that one under the boil segment, which we're going to get into in the next segment. Right. It's all good. So we do have to take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to be diving in to our thoughts on boil experiments. Stick with us. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer, and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. I don't know about you, Cade, but when I first started brewing, it was drilled into me that wort has to be boiled quite vigorously for at least 1 hour, if not more, in order to isomerize alpha acids, drive off DMS, and whatever magical stuff else happens in the boil. Over the years, we've done quite a few experiments focused on these various aspects of the boil, and I'm curious, have they influenced you in any way whatsoever?
Oh, I mean, totally, right? I mean, you talked about mash length, right, as being like 60 minutes. And the thing that you said is humans, or time as humans define it, which I'm going to start using in my regular language because I think that's an amazing way to talk about time. So as humans define time.
Yeah, exactly.
But like the boil length thing, right? Again, I told you I beat my head against the wall for doing a 60-minute mash, but also beat my head against the wall for doing a 60-minute boil because I just don't think that's necessary anymore at all. The boil length, I mean, and again, like there's a couple of boil variables that I think all get lumped into one for me. It's like you need to have a long boil so that you can boil off all these sort of, allegedly gross, nasty compounds like DMS or whatever. You need to have a vigorous boil so that you can also get rid of DMS and off-gas all these things, and you can't cover your boil, right? Those were all of these things that people used to say, like, do not, we boil for 90 minutes and make it, boil off so that you're losing like a third of your wort that's just evaporating into the air, and then don't cover it because all this DMS is going to drip back in. Don't heat up your boil kettle faster or slower, or help your kettle along, or save time during the brew day because it's going to destroy the beer. I've done all those things. I brewed at a shorter length, I brewed with lower vigor, and I've covered my boil for the entire 60 minutes, and I've never had an issue. All that said, the science is real about DMS, okay? People have been able to reproduce that a lot, right? But this is my view and my experience. I've never had an issue with any of those variables cutting those corners, and it saves me so much time and effort on brew day. It's so helpful for me, and so those are big ones.
I'll tell you what, I'm with you that those three I lump those together as well. Boil length, I am no longer convinced in the linearity of isomerization of alpha acids. I don't think that, for example, if you're going to use a half ounce or 14 grams at 60 minutes, that if you just go 1 ounce, or 28 grams at 30 minutes, then you're going to get the same level of bitterness. I don't think it's that cut and dry. I actually think it's quite simpler. We don't have to overthink, if we're going to boil for 30 minutes. One thing for sure that I don't believe whatsoever is that the boil length is necessarily a factor when it comes to DMS. I know what you're saying, Cade, about the science that dimethyl sulfide is real. It does exist. In fact, I'm quite sensitive to it based on flavor standards that I've done multiple times. It's one of the few that I am very sensitive to. I have never been able to create a beer with DMS in it. And I think the reason for that, I don't think it has anything to do with boil vigor, as long as you've got a slight boil. In fact, I don't know if we did an experiment on it or if somebody sent me an experiment they did, but they just brought their wort up to like 205 degrees. So still very hot enough to isomerize alpha acids, but not rolling. And the beer came out just fine. So the boil vigor thing, the covered boil, I mean, I don't need to do that. I've got a 240 volt electric system, so no need to cover it. But if you've got a 120 volt system and you're struggling to reach a boil, cover it, 80% of the way. You're not going to get DMS from that. I mean, we have tried. Again, my opinion, but those things are just so fascinating to me because, like you said, Cade, we were taught that you have to do all of these things or you are going to make a DMS bomb. We have tried and we cannot do it. And that part to me, that was a very surprising finding, is that all of these things, your length, your vigor, whether you're covering the kettle or not, don't seem to have nearly the impact that a lot of us were taught that it does. And I think that's a really helpful result for us. All of those findings, I think, when somebody's reading that going, oh, good, I'm not going to make a bad beer because I don't have the ability to boil vigorously, in an uncovered kettle for 60 minutes or whatever.
Right. And I mean, I will say that I think this is one of those situations where home brewers have it easier than commercial brewers, right?
Absolutely.
Because
absolutely.
I do think that boil length, boil vigor, and certainly covering the kettle can cause issues in commercial breweries. I mean, there's a whole lot of scientific experiments out there that have shown that the reflux or whatever dripping back down into the kettle causes DMS in beer, right? They've measured it, they've done it, and they've shown that does happen. And I think that got translated over to home brewers, but I've got to think it's just the mechanics of the kettle itself, right?
Potentially, yeah.
And commercial brewers also have to be really concerned with their evaporation rate because they're trying to hit target numbers for OG and making sure that the mash is coming in at the right level so that the wort that goes into the tank makes the right beer, right?
Bingo. That's what I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so those things are important to commercial brewers, but this is one of those topics, boil, I think especially, is one of those where home brewers have it a little easier than commercial brewers. And we get to deal with a whole bunch of stuff that in my opinion, doesn't matter as much.
Well, and I don't want to diss any of our sponsors or the people who are creating badass gear, for home brewers to use, but these like steam chimneys, like really, you're going to go through the effort of like, you're not going to taste I really don't. I mean, if you're using it to avoid like moisture in your brewery, then by all means, that's wonderful. But if you're doing it because you think that by covering it, you're going to get deep, whatever. I mean, I just think it's weird. One of the boil related findings that I thought was really interesting was the comparison that I did of a beer hit with Irish moss versus one that wasn't fined in the kettle at all. I always used it because Irish moss or Whirlflock is really cheap and it's easy to add in with your last hop addition or whatever. But I was still making beers that weren't crystal clear. I was fascinated when the only variable was Irish moss in the kettle, and I think I made a red ale, and the beers came back, and the one that was hit with Irish moss, it wasn't crystal clear, but it was noticeably clearer than the one that didn't have Irish moss. So whatever that stuff is doing, the carrageenan and Irish moss really does seem to precipitate some of the stuff in beer, have it fall out so that you get a clearer beer in the end. So that was kind of a cool finding.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we focus so much on sensory, like taste and aroma, right? We're not doing the appearance differences whenever we're doing our experiments, but findings certainly work, right? And if you want clear beer, I mean, even in a hazy, you can still use Whirlflock, right? I mean, and Irish moss. It is going to pull out some of the proteins that might lead to a more stable haze, but you can still use those findings and still make a hazy beer. So that's
absolutely,
and it works. And to me, the biggest thing was, and this is going to apply later as well when we talk about findings in the fermenter. But people were always worried that like, oh, if I'm doing this Irish moss, or this Whirlflock or isinglass, it's going to bind with hop, things, and it's going to pull all those out, and then we're not going to have the nice flavor that I want or whatever. And it's just, there's just been no indications, no scientific proof of any of that.
No.
And then there's also in our experiments, no sensory proof of it at least either.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I do want to hit on the whole kettle troop thing, which you brought up at the end of the last segment. That was the very first real experiment that we did. And to this day, it's still one of our most popular, which is weird because you don't really hear kettle troop talked about that much. I know some people call it trub. So that's what we're talking about. But it's all the gunk at the bottom of your kettle after you boil. Jordan, who is our most traditionalist brewer, he actually, between the boil and the fermenter, he racks the wort to a vessel to let the trub fall out before he racks the clear wort over to his fermentation tank. So, a lot of people are very, very convinced that clear wort not necessarily leads to clear beer, but leads to better beer. What I've found, I was convinced of that for a long time. I'd finish the boil, I'd let the wort sit in the kettle for 10 minutes, and then I'd rack the clear wort over to my fermentation vessel. These days, I don't do that, but I'm also not racking huge amounts of trub over. We did an experiment that did show that high amounts of kettle trub do seem to have a noticeable impact, and to me, it was not good. But oddly enough, that beer was clearer, it fermented faster. There are nutrients in trub that the yeast need to do their job well. So those are my thoughts on the kettle trub thing. I'm not doing, again, I'm not pouring the whole kettle in, though I know a lot of people who do that and they get away with it. They like the beer they're making. So.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a lot of nutrients that go into the beer from trub. And it's not to say, like you said, you don't need to just dump the kettle straight into your fermenter, right? And dump all that trub in there, because there's other stuff that you don't want in your beer. And a big one is all that protein, right? Because all that protein that's going to create haze issues, but the yeast is also going to take that protein and turn it into other things. So, there are things that happen. Actually, that kind of leads into chilling too, right? Which I know is one of the topics we're going to talk about too, is like chilling versus not chilling. So it's this transfer of wort to the fermenter, and it does matter, right? Like, to me at least, the chilling your wort creates this flavor impact where the proteins and a lot of other things floating around in the wort drop out, right? And that
Absolutely.
big cold break, hot break does have a role in not only like how the beer looks, but also how it tastes too. Like I said, yeast will take those proteins and turn it into other things. Some of those are good, some of them are bad, some of them have no flavor impact whatsoever, some of them do, and some of them the yeast need, right? Some of them are nutrients that the yeast needs. But you can, this whole thing of like racking clear beer and quick chilling, I think is, again, homebrewers trying to mimic commercial processes, or at least like German brewing processes, where they do like what Jordan does, where he transfers the beer into a lauter tun to separate off and then rack clear beer into the fermenter, and then add yeast nutrient and that stuff whenever you pitch the yeast, right? So, I mean, the yeast are still getting their nutrient, but you're taking the nutrient out and then adding it back in to control the process, right? Control the process and create consistent beer. So I think some of that got lost in transition over the years.
Absolutely. So speaking of chilling, there's various ways to chill. You can use an immersion chiller. You can use a counterflow. I'm not going to focus too much on that because we haven't found that it really makes any difference whatsoever. Choose what works best with your system. I do prefer immersion because I hate not being able to see inside of a counterflow chiller. I'm just neurotic like that. But one thing that an opinion that I hold now after doing an experiment myself has to do with this whole no chill method, which I know is really popular in Australia, places where they're worried about drought. They don't have access to as much water. They don't want to waste water. So it works. I've done it. It works. But I could very easily pick up a difference between a batch of beer that I chilled using, a standard immersion chiller, so quick chill, versus putting one into a cube, letting it sit overnight, and then pitching yeast and fermenting it. To me, there's a no-brainer that I'm just going to quick chill. I don't have to worry too much about the water usage here, and I do repurpose my water, so there's that piece of it. I've had no-chill beers that are fantastic. In fact, I have a friend, Aaron, who's not brewing anymore, but I believe he won an award for a mild that he made using the no-chill method. So again, this isn't a one's bad, one's good thing, but personal preference for me, based on the experiment that I've done, is that quick chilling is one, produces a noticeable impact over no chilling, so you can taste the difference. At least in this experiment, people could. And for me personally, I prefer the quick chill.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is science, right? The cold break does something scientific. It causes proteins to coagulate and settle out. Proteins and other things, right? And they agglomerate and they settle out. Otherwise, those proteins go into your fermenter and then they get modified by yeast. I mean, that's a pretty clear scientific trend that we've seen, and we can prove. So it makes sense that there's a change. Now, again, this is one of those, like, it's not necessarily better, it's just different, right? Because some of those proteins are good, and they may actually improve the flavor of your beer, it may improve fermentation, all that stuff. So again, the whole chiller thing is kind of like the equipment stuff that we talked about earlier. It's the same as the mash equipment. It's just like, to each your own. Use what you've got on hand. But oh my God, like plate chillers and counterflow, well, plate chillers more than anything, they scare the hell out of me because, oh my gosh, there's so many. I mean, I've said it a bunch of times on the show, and I'll say it again here. When Eric Pierce was talking to us about the time that he used a water saw to cut through his plate chiller and started like looking in there, I mean, there was black mold growing in his plate chiller, and he'd hit it with, PBW and caustic and all kinds of stuff to try to clean it out as much as he could. But no matter what he did, there's still black gunk in there, and your beer's touching that black gunk. So
right.
Yeah. Even plate chillers in the brewery are scary things. I mean, you should see the CIP procedures for actual commercial breweries on their plate chillers. I mean, it's short of just like disassembling the whole plate chiller, but they are seriously hitting those things between every single batch to make sure that stuff's not growing in there. So that's the only thing I would say about those. But again, the chill seems to be important, but the gear itself much less important to me.
Yeah.
Other than plate chillers.
Yeah. Man, I'll tell you, I bought a plate chiller because I was like, everybody's using this. It's like what they use at the pros use. I used it twice, and believe me, I clean my stuff. I'm crazy about it. The second time I used the damn thing, it was like chunks of black crap were flowing out of it into my wort. It freaked me out. I pulled out my immersion chiller. It worked faster. I was just happier with it. And then I did every cleaning thing to try to get... it was more of an experiment at this point. I baked it. I ran a hot PBW through it. Nothing cleaned this thing out. And not knowing what's in there, I was like, screw this, man. I gave it away. I gave it to a buddy of mine who wanted to use it. So, all right. Probably, I mean, in my opinion, it is the biggest thing that we've done experiments on, fermentation. And there are so many aspects to fermentation that, I was taught are of utmost importance. I mean, obviously, fermentation is where wort becomes beer. It's where the magic happens. It's what I think a lot of us are enamored by, is this idea that yeast are converting, sugary wort into delicious beer. That's amazing. And rightfully so, we pay a lot of attention to it. Things like, we'll just go in order, when you consider it. One of the first things that I was like, I've got to test this out because, again, I was so convinced that the amount of yeast, viability, pitch rate, was absolutely important. When I started all grain brewing, it was like, you got to make yeast starters. If you don't make yeast starters, you're going to make crap homebrew tasting beer. That is the issue. And so I went out and bought 2 different size Erlenmeyer flasks. I loaded up on DME. I made yeast starters for everything. And we started doing these pitch rate comparisons, and we couldn't find that pitch rate. When you're using quality yeast and you're comparing, vital, we didn't refer to it as vitality back then as much as we talk about vitality these days. If you're using yeast that is equally as fresh, that is, everything about it's the same. It's just one is more viable than the other. So you've got this nice recommended, I put that in air quotes, pitch rate versus a lower pitch rate. It doesn't seem to have a perceptible impact on beer. Is there going to be a cutoff point to where, okay, you're either not getting fermentation or you're stressing that yeast out so much that, there's probably, but that's so unreasonable. Like that number, in my experience, this is my opinion, that number is so unreasonably low that it's just likely not to happen unless you are trying to make it happen. We don't even, for the most part, we're not making starters these days at Brewlosophy. We're pitching a pouch of imperial yeast and calling it a day, and it's working out perfectly fine. So as far as pitch rate is concerned, those experiments absolutely did influence the way that I view, pitch rate in terms of brewing.
Yeah, but I think the only experiments that have seemed to be like significant in terms of pitch rate were the ones where we've used a yeast cake, right? You're like pitching directly on top of a yeast cake.
Yeah,
those have always come back as different, and I think so that it is a good point, right? Direct pitches from pouches, like whether it's dry yeast, whether it's rehydrated dry yeast, whether it's dry yeast versus liquid yeast, or any of that stuff, that doesn't seem to really matter. If it's coming from the manufacturer, it's going to work, and you don't really need to make a starter. And I think that's been a big thing for me, is that you can buy yeast off the shelf as long as it's reasonably, aged. It's not like old yeast, then you're going to make something great. And it's been kind of one of those things. Like, we haven't really done these experiments yet, as with Brewlosophy, on like second and third generation yeast and how some of these other, variables might impact those. But I think we might start to see some differences on like, the pitch rate. If you're having second or third generation yeast, then yeah, you might need to pay more control to what you're pitching, because you don't know, right? It's second or third generation yeast. You don't know how much of that is viable and can pitch, but.
We've done some generation experiments, third gen, fifth gen, whatever. And again, we're not finding a huge impact there. And we've also done some overpitching experiments that didn't return significant results. There are, when you're racking onto a yeast cake, usually the idea there, the underlying motivation is, okay, I need a lot of yeast because I'm making this 10, or 1100 OG beer or something like that. And so you want that overpitch. It's not really an overpitch at that rate. Slightly, arguably, but but if you're gonna pitch, say, a nice Munich Helles onto a yeast cake, chances are it's gonna ferment very fast. It's gonna work, but chances are it might taste a little bit different than if you were to pitch a standard of viability. That's fine. It doesn't make it bad though. I'm gonna say that over and over again. You have to do what tastes good to you, and just because something tastes different doesn't mean one's better than the other. So in terms of pitch rate, I don't focus on it too much. That said, I do believe that fermentation is where the majority of problems happen. Fermentation and packaging is where I think most issues occur, right? Whether that's contamination, whether that's oxidation, whatever it is. So, and I do feel like pitch rate matters. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but I feel like most homebrewers have access to a reasonably viable yeast fresh off the shelf these days, whether it's Y Yeast, White Labs, Imperial, Omega, Bootleg Biology. All of these places are serving up good yeast. And if you're getting it relatively fresh, you can pitch that and chances are you're going to be good to go. That's my opinion. Pitch temperature, couldn't care less. I don't even know why we think a 2 degree difference is going to matter. Yes, yeast, fermentation is exothermic. It's going to heat up that you are putting it in a chamber. You're using glycol, whatever you're doing. Just pitch it at your fermentation temperature. Again, my opinion. I'm only saying, I'm acting like I'm recommending it because it's Brews Views, but that's what I do. I got to pitch at 46 degrees and then ferment it at 48. That's fine. You do you. It's not making any difference whatsoever. That's 2 degree Fahrenheit difference. That's like a barely a 1 degree Celsius difference. I don't think it matters.
Right. I totally agree with you in terms of like pitch temperature. If your pitch temperature is 66 Fahrenheit and you're pitching at, at 75, you're totally going to be fine, right? This is not going to be an issue. Right. Like I wouldn't worry about it at all. Like just, because it was a big deal for me in Texas, right? I couldn't get my groundwater to chill down without putting like an ice bath in line in the chiller. So oftentimes I would just put my wort in the chamber at like, 85 degrees Fahrenheit or something. And when it got down to like 80, 75, I'd throw the yeast in and be done and wouldn't worry about it. I think lager yeast has a little bit of a different, might have a little, I'll say it that way. Jake did one experiment using a lager yeast where he pitched at 48 Fahrenheit, which I think is what, like 9, 10, 12, 11 Celsius, something like that.
Yeah, it's 9C. Yeah.
There we go, 9 Celsius. And then he did another one and then he did the other batch at 80 Fahrenheit, which is what, 25 or 26 Celsius. And so that was a big difference. And I think for some lager yeast, that might actually cause a difference, depending on how quick you get down to that fermentation temperature, because it might stress out the yeast really quick. But other experiments have shown this just doesn't seem to matter all that much. Just get close to your fermentation temperature and you're golden.
Yeah. What's funny is this kind of shows our entry into homebrewing. I was referring to cooler pitching temp. So the recommendation was always chill to 2 to 4 degrees below your target fermentation temp and pitch there, and then exothermic activity will bring it up and blah, blah. No, what's funny to me is that you're actually talking about pitching warm and then chilling down, which was before my time, even before I started brewing in the early 2000s. Apparently that was a recommendation because of the low viability of available yeast at the time. If you pitched warm, it would wake that yeast up. It would encourage it to reproduce as you're chilling that wort down to your target fermentation temperature. We've done that as well, like you talked about with Jake's experiment with the lager yeast, but I believe we've done that with ale yeast as well. And yeah, you're fine to do that. Now, you got to be careful not to kill these yeast. I mean, don't go pitching into a 115 degree wort, and expect the yeast to ferment once it gets down to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you're going to pitch, I've pitched at 73 degrees Fahrenheit, chilled it down to 68, you're good to go. No off flavors, no issues there. So it doesn't matter. I think on some level it does. And I think that if you go to the extremes, you're going to be able to show and demonstrate that it does have an impact. But within reason, all of this like fine-tuned, you have to pitch 2 degrees cooler than your fermentation temperature, I don't think it matters very much personally. Now, we have to talk about fermentation temperature, but Cade, we have belabored this topic. I feel this is one we have absolutely done multiple shows on. We get asked about all the time. So I am just going to share my opinions real quick, and then I'll let you take it where you want. I ferment pretty much everything at 66 degrees Fahrenheit or 19 degrees Celsius these days. That includes lagers, that includes ales, that includes Kolsch, that includes whatever it is. Because what I've found in my experience and through many, many experiments is that is a good temperature for every style of beer. The lager enthusiasts out there are shaking their heads, shaking their fist at the radio right now. They want to punch me in the face. That's fine with me. There are certain yeasts, certain lager yeasts in particular, that do seem to be more sensitive to temperature than others. Global, that's the Weihenstephan lager strain, is not one of them. It's a fantastic yeast at 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10C. It's a fantastic yeast at 66 degrees or 19C. And people can't seem to tell it apart. You take something like Que Bueno, that's the Mexican lager strain, the Grupo Modelo strain. And yeah, it does seem to taste different at those different fermentation temperatures. But oddly enough, when I asked people, well, which one tastes more like a lager to you? They said the warm one, the one that was fermented warm. So figure that out. You have to figure this shit out for yourself. That's my thing, is you might actually like going against the rules, the beer that the outcome of the beer that you make going against the rules than you do going with it. Try it out for yourself. I mean, that's the fun thing about homebrewing, is you can test this out and you might be shocked with the outcome.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at the biggest impact of Brewlosophy, I mean, I think this is one of those places where we've really, really made people think about what they're doing in their brewing practices. Yeah. I mean, we've just done so much looking at fermentation temperature, right? And I think you make a good point there about like Que Bueno and Chico and all these other strains that we've tested, on fermentation temperature. It can be strain dependent, right? Some yeast is going to have a wide fermentation range, and some yeast is going to have a very narrow one. But they are going to ferment at those different temperatures. It's not like you're not going to produce beer if you ferment Que Bueno at 70 Fahrenheit or 80 Fahrenheit, right? It's just going to be different. I mean, I think the best example of this is the Kvike yeast, right? When it came out, everybody was like, holy moly, you can pitch this at 100 Fahrenheit or 40 C, and you can make a totally clean beer, and it's awesome. It ferments in 2 days. Do it. And we started doing this, and then as we sort of drill into Kvike, you can do it, but it often throws out this, like, I'm going to call it tangy, and maybe it's this pH thing I'm learning about, but it throws off this tangy off flavor, right? Or not off flavor, but it's this tangy flavor. And it's clean and it's clear and it tastes like a nice ale, but there's just something about it that isn't quite what I'm looking for. Pitch Kvike at normal fermentation temperatures and it tastes exactly like another ale yeast, right? Or at least similar, right? It's got its own unique characteristics. I'm not going to say it's the same as Chico, but it's, because I do think it's different, but it still makes a really good beer at that temperature. And then here comes along, Escarpment Labs and the guys there, Richard Priest, doing some with Lars Marius Garshall, doing some experiments saying, turns out if you ferment Weich yeast at different temperatures, it produces different sensory characteristics. And but the coolest part, right? The biggest thing that we've done is so like, okay, yeah, you can ferment lagers warm, save yourself some time, and it's still going to be a really good, nice, crisp tasting lager.
Yeah.
Right. So you've got so much more ability, so much more flexibility than we thought we had. Right. This whole thing, like we need to be within 2 degrees of the fermentation temperature, like the range of fermentation for whatever global. I don't know what it says on Imperial. I'm making this up. I'm pretending here, but say it's like oh yeah, it's 45 Fahrenheit to 49 Fahrenheit. That's the ideal range. No, nobody says that anymore, and nobody cares. And I think that's a big thing that Brewlosophy's done. I mean, this is a big impact one for me. Is this fermentation temperature matters. It can change the flavor of your beer, but you have a lot of flexibility and wiggle room here.
I think the key takeaway from our fermentation temperature experiments is that yes, even if it does create a perceptible, if it has a perceptible impact, it doesn't mean it's bad. And I was fully expecting the very first lager fermentation temperature experiment that I did was using WLP 800, which Imperial calls Urkel. It's the PU strain, basically. I fully expected the warm fermented one just to be this fruity ester bomb, and it was not. It was the opposite. And that was one I absolutely took to NHC and served it to a bunch of people whose voices you know well out there. And they were all equally as shocked as I was that it was as clean and lager-like as that beer turned out to be. So that's one. Again, there are going to be adherence to tradition. I love that. Jordan is one of them. And we have there's no judgment coming from our, this side of the table. We know that we get a lot of judgment from the other side, and that's okay with us. But those lager fermentation temperature experiments in particular really did have a huge impact on the way that I approach making lager beers. It actually opened up, my world to lager fermentation and making more lagers. So those have been really cool and influential for me. In that in between fermentation and packaging, you've got things like cold side oxidation. That's one that I viewed as being very similar in terms of the influence it's had on me as water chemistry. I just did not think that it was that big of a deal when I first started kegging, for example. I now absolutely trust, I would say I know that cold side oxidation is a very real thing and we want to avoid it at all costs. I have produced beers very easily. Unlike DMS, it's very easy to produce a beer that is oxidized. And yes, there are certain styles that oddly enough do seem to be less sensitive to the oxidative effects, but for the most part, beer in general is very sensitive to oxygen. Once you're done fermenting, in my opinion, you really ought to do everything you possibly can to keep it out of, from being exposed to oxygen. Cold side oxidation just tastes so gross to me. So that's a bit, I imagine it's kind of the same for you, Cade.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this kind of, blends into the packaging variable too, right? Like open and closed transfers, but cold side oxidation, I think that's the second biggest, maybe the third biggest, because I think gelatin and finings is also a big key that Brewlosophy's had here. But, but the cold side oxidation, I think that's another one that, especially for homebrewers, a lot of homebrewers just weren't worried about cold side oxidation. But I'll never forget, it was the metabisulfite experiment that I did in the hazy IPA, where I just sort of dumped my beer from the fermenter into the keg on one, and then I added metabisulfites on the other, which metabisulfites are going to scavenge some of that oxygen.
Yeah.
And that beer that I had no oxygen controls on, it turned purple and was gross within a week. I mean, it was done. And I mean, you can see it. The pictures are awesome on the internet. You can see how it changes just like after a few days, after a week, after 2 weeks. And even the metabisulfites couldn't save that beer, right? I mean, it was just, there was so much oxygen exposure in there that even the metabisulfites couldn't do anything. That it ultimately turned purple too. but like after a month or so. But this is so important. Cold side oxygen. I mean, there's very few things that I'm like, you need to buy gear for. And if you can, this is one of those where I would spend my money to upgrade my gear so
Without
that I can
a
do closed pressure transfers and avoid oxygen. This is a big one for me. Super important.
It actually, our concern with cold side oxidation, again, I wasn't terribly concerned about it until we did these experiments. So it has had a huge impact on my approach. It actually, the outcomes of these experiments actually spurred the development of other ideas for reducing cold side oxidation, like this weird like double keg setup that I've got where I capture the CO2, created during fermentation in one keg and then rack the beer from the fermentation vessel into that purged keg using natural CO2, trying to come up with ways to make it less expensive and easier for the standard home brewer to do. So you did bring up findings as well. The claims, you don't hear it nearly as much these days as you used to, but man, if you find your fermented beer, if you do any sort of finding, you're going to pull out those delicate malt and hop flavors and bullshit. I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. You're not pulling any of the flavor compounds out. We have not been able to prove it. I've actually talked to people who have studied it in the lab and they're not able to show or prove it. That is just hogwash that somebody came up with because they don't want to deal with it or something. I don't know. But gelatin makes beautifully clear beer. Biofine makes okay clear beer. Clarity Firm has never worked for me ever. I don't even know what the process is of making that stuff work. But gelatin is such a powerful thing. I get it. If you're vegan or vegetarian, you can't use gelatin, fine. But if you want clear beer and you're not vegan or vegetarian, go get yourself a $15 pack of gelatin. The little tub of gelatin will last you years, and all you're doing is mixing a half a teaspoon with a half a cup of water or less, heating it up and then tossing it in your fermented beer. It is not only does it very quickly create a clear beer, but there's some speculation, and I've experienced this as well, that it has a sort of like a prophylactic effect against oxidation. I don't know why, I don't know how, but it's something that we could actually test out, I suppose. But for some reason, beers that I find with gelatin seem to oxidate a little or get oxidized a little bit less quickly than those that aren't fined with gelatin, which I think is just an interesting anecdote.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the oxygen exposure piece of this. I mean, we've certainly done a number of tests that show a gelatin doesn't alter the flavor of the beer, at least within a few weeks after kegging when we're most likely, collecting our results, But I mean, I think that's a very powerful thing. And I think that's one of the things that again, I don't know that I'm going to claim credit for Brewlosophy here, but I think we certainly had an influence on the conversation.
Sure.
Right? Because you said, people were saying, oh, if you use gelatin, it's going to pull out hop flavor. And that just doesn't seem to be consistent with what we find in the experiments, right?
Well, even on a hoppy IPA. I mean, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, even on hazy IPA, even putting like 5 ounces or 6 ounces of dry hop in the beer, it still just doesn't seem to pull out any flavor components. Findings do not ruin the beer. In fact, I think using Whirlfloc in the boil, using findings at the end, and then sort of managing your fermentation when you add dry hops and stuff like that are keys to creating really good, clean beer. And I still think creating crystal clear beer is very hard to do and the sign of a very good brewer. Yeah. And so using these things like findings is something that you should be doing in your process if you're trying to make crystal clear, fantastic beer. So this one, again, I mean, I'm not going to say that Brewlosophy changed the conversation here, but certainly influenced the conversation in terms of use of findings, gelatin specifically, but also Biofine as well, being able to use those and not worry about flavor loss.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's weird to have to accept that we've had some influence on other people and what they do, but that's why we're talking about it today, right? Because we've been told that we have, and we might as well share some of our opinions on it. Real quick, I thought we'd finish up with just some packaging and serving variables. Not much to talk about here. We'd already focused on cold side oxidation. Everything that I package now is closed transferred, pressure transferred into a purged keg. That's just how I do it because I hate CSO. I don't want cold side oxidation. But in terms of like carbonation, we've done burst carb versus slow carb, no difference there. We've done natural carbonation or, keg/bottle conditioning versus, forced carbonation. That doesn't seem to have much of an impact. So I think there's a lot of, again, you do what you want to do there, what works best for you. I personally prefer burst carbonation because I am impatient. And so I want to be drinking my beer as soon after it gets into the keg as possible. So I do burst carbonation there. Otherwise though, if I'm making a beer I know I'm not going to touch for a couple of months, it's just easier to put it on at serving pressure, which for me is 14 PSI given the length of my line. And I'll just let it sit for a month or so, and it carbs up perfectly fine that way too.
Yeah, I don't remember who it was, but it was either you or me on an episode, and we might have been actually quoting somebody else, but the quote was CO2 is CO2 is CO2, right?
Exactly.
Right? I mean, whether it comes from yeast or whether it comes from a can or a tank, it's all just the same thing. If you're hitting the same CO2 saturation level in the beer, then the carbonation is no different, whether it's natural or CO2.
Yeah.
Now, if there's oxygen exposure or something like that, that can totally have a deal. And I mean, especially for it can have an impact. And for commercial brewers, this was a big deal because CO2 from suppliers isn't always totally oxygen free.
Right.
So, you need to monitor the DO on your CO2 tanks as they come in. But that's a different issue. That's not about carbonation or carbonation level. That's about oxygen exposure from the CO2.
Yeah.
Right. But getting the CO2 to the saturation level, there's no difference. And we've done numerous experiment over that. And also like the impact of serving vessel, right? Like pouring beer out of a bottle versus pouring beer out of a keg and all those other things. I really don't care. To me,
Either do I, man. Yeah.
Right?
Do you?
yeah, you do you. It doesn't seem to be a big deal. But again, it's that oxygen exposure that's the problem, right? Whenever you're going into a bottle, that's a source of oxygen because you can't fully purge. You can fully purge out the oxygen. That's not you can do that. But the ingress can come in through the cap. It can also, you may not fully purge the bottle. So if you're racking from a keg to a bottle for competitions and stuff, that's a possibility for oxygen ingress. But that's oxygen. That's not necessarily like the package thing. That's like how oxygen impacts and gets into the beer. But serving a beer for a keg or from a growler or from CO2 purged things, you do you. If you've got the ability to use those carb caps on plastic bottles, then that's awesome.
Yeah,
and you can serve your beer that way, and it tastes great. And I've had that. So I think we've got really cool tools and options out there for that.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And that's exactly it. I love that homebrewers now have access to canning machines and all that. But if all you've got is bottles or a growler or a Nalgene bottle, I mean, we've done experiments even on that, comparing beer stored in a Nalgene bottle. It all works fine. You just have to mind your oxygen exposure. I think that's the key. Otherwise, the vessel doesn't seem to have much of an impact. My preference is just to take it right off the keg out of the tap,
Sure. Everybody loves doing that, right?
Yeah,
everybody, especially your friends when they come over to your house and they're like,
yeah.
You brew beer, and then they, start pulling beers off of your keg. It's fun.
Spilling your beer all over your garage. Oh my God, man! Learn how to use a freaking faucet, right?
Yeah, just put a towel down. Just put a towel down. It's fine. Yeah, all the way open too. All the way open. Open that thing all the way. Don't.
It's the crack. Like, dude, do you want a glass full of foam or not?
Yeah,
that's exactly what you're getting. But,
exactly.
Well, that is all the time we've got for our views on the experiment results and how they've influenced our brewing. Do you have any final words, Cade?
Oh man, this was a fun one. I hope people look at this and can use this as a reference a little bit too. But if you've got opinions that are different than me, I'd love to hear about them. So send me an email and let's chat.
Yeah, I honestly, this was not a lesson. This was not us telling you how you should brew. It's telling you how we have interpreted the results of over 500 experiments that we've done and how they've impacted us. If that affects you, great. If not, if you're going to do it the old way, that's cool too. We're still your butt. I'll buy you a beer. All right, don't forget to listen and subscribe to the Brew Lab, where Cade takes you into the lab with brewing professionals to discuss the fascinating work they've done on our favorite beverage. And make sure to head to brewlosophy.com to stay current on all of the fun beer and brewing stuff we're up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.